All right.
We
Hey,
have, we have 3 people so far that have come in, and I would just give it a minute or two, Ari, and then we'll start.
sounds good.
Cool. Ooh, I see some familiar names to me, so I'm super excited. Yay. For those of you who are attending before Ari gets started, please feel free to use the chat function. Please feel free to either chat to the whole group, or you can message Ari or myself directly. Ari is going to be the primary presenter today. So if you do have any questions, comments, or concerns directly, please feel free to reach out directly to me. I will also be monitoring the chat. So again, you can send a private message to me, or you can talk in the chat. I will be watching both. And I think I'm just going to pass it now over to you, Ari. I think it's okay for you to go ahead and begin.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the final day of Sensory of Animal Assisted Services and Service Animals. My name is Ari, and I use she and they pronouns. I'm a doctoral student studying occupational therapy at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm here with Sarah. Sarah, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Sarah Selvaggi Hernandez. My pronouns are also she, they. Ari and I look very similar as we have all field work, I think, but I'm wearing a gray shirt and I have a kind of wavy chin length hair. I also use pronouns she, they, and I am many things, but sometimes I play the autistic OT or the deaf autistic OT on social media. And one of my most favorite things that I've been doing is RE's clinical supervisor. It has been a wonderful rotation. Tomorrow is Ari's last day, and I am so excited to be a support while we wrap up the sensory of animal assisted services and service animals.
Thank you, Sarah. Mm-hmm. All right, so today Sarah and I are going to talk through a case study in which we will explore my results on the adolescent adult sensory profile assessment, and we'll talk about how we could structure and accommodate different activities in an equine assisted therapy context and in a service dog context to best meet my sensory needs. Before we jump into my sensory profile results, I'd like to invite Sarah to define a few key terms for us.
Sure. So when Ari and I were working this semester, and the primary model that we use was sensory processing as defined by Winnie Dunn. This is the model that I always use primarily because of the foundation that sensory processing, our brain is our brain is our brain is our brain. There is nothing inherently disordered about an autistic or neurodivergent brain. And we do experience things differently at a statistically significant level. So sensory processing is the approach I take to validate neurodivergent sensory processing experiences. And in sensory processing literature, and one of the things that we'll be talking about today, there's just a couple of terms that it's important for you to have a little bit of familiarity with. The first are thresholds. Thresholds, again, are a continuum. They are ever changing, ever evolving, but to make it as simple as I can, typically a sensory system, whether we're talking about sight, sound, interoception, how we feel inside of ourselves, each one of those systems has a threshold, and that threshold can be low, or that threshold can be high. A low threshold I like to liken to like a tiny teacup a little bit of a thimbleful. It only takes a little bit of sensory information to meet the required amount of sensory information for that system to become aware and activated. A low threshold only needs a teeny tiny bit of information to wake that system up. Low thresholds also tend to become dysregulated more quickly because, as you can imagine, as you're filling that cup up, just a little bit more will make it spill over. So that's a low threshold. And on the other side of the continuum, we have high thresholds. High thresholds are like great big old buckets of fun. You need a lot of sensory input inside of a high threshold system in order for it to become aware or active or engaged. So I like to say, like, let's pick on my hearing. My hearing's a fun one. But if sometimes my hearing really has very low thresholds, most of the time it has a very low threshold. So I'm actually, even though I don't often hear because I am deaf, I'm very sensitive to the processing required for sound. So it only takes a little bit of sound in my environment to make me aware that I need to pay attention. Wild, Ari, even though I'm deaf. The other side of that, with somebody who might have a high threshold, I will pick on my husband. He has a very high threshold for hearing, and genuinely 100%. What that means is I need to say his name or make noise or do something to activate his auditory system, and I've got to do a lot of it, or have it be loud, or have it be some kind of interesting tone or quality before he's able to, even at a neurological level, be aware that sound is being created. So I'm the person, you say my name once, I'm hearing it, even though I'm like, I'm just so sensitive to that. My threshold's very low. I can say his name a million billion times, and I need to say his name a million billion times in order for him to actually be aware of what we're saying. So low threshold, tiny teacup, high threshold, big old bucket. We also, in sensory processing, talk about different types of strategies, and strategies can be, again, continuum between passive strategies and active strategies. Passive strategies are, even though I do love a passive strategy in the sense of laying back and receiving passive information, the more nuanced meaning of a passive strategy is it applies to the way that we set up environments and context for success, meaning it can be societal expectations, it could be having ear defenders available in the environment. It could be having, my curtains closed to remove light. These are all things that I could be doing in my environment to set myself up for success based on my sensory profile. Active strategies are more in the moment, the things that we do, the things that we engage in, and the things that we create to meet our sensory needs. So we often think of active strategies like you can see them a bit more, but it doesn't mean that there's really there's no important difference. Like each are so valid, each are so important for the individual. Brains just have a preference in each system for things that involve more like active in the movement engagement, or having things set up around us to support our success. So low, high threshold, active, passive strategy. So that's sensory processing in a very quick nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
All right. So here's a little bit of information about me before we start into the case study. So I'm a 29-year-old gender fluid woman, and I have a prior diagnosis history of generalized anxiety disorder, autism, and ADHD. On the right side of this slide, there's a selfie of me and my service dog, Winston, who is a blue standard poodle. And Winston is wearing a turquoise collar with red and silver dog tags. All right, so here is information on my sensory processing based on my results on the adolescent adult sensory profile. So I'll go through these and reference back to what Sarah was just talking about with thresholds and active and passive strategies. And then Sarah, if you'd like to jump in at any time to add in, please do. All right, so I scored more than most people on low registration, and low registration means high thresholds and a preference for passive strategies. So my score of more than most people means that I have a higher threshold than most people, and I have a greater need for passive strategies. So I benefit from increasing cues and strategies built into my environment to support my performance of certain tasks. So for example, I benefit from setting up my pillbox weekly and keeping my pillbox in the same really easy to spot location on my dining table. And I have a repeating alarm on my phone every day multiple times, all to support me in remembering to take my medication on time.
That big old bucket need. Yeah, good. Yes.
And then I scored less than most people on sensation seeking. Sensation seeking means high thresholds and a preference for active strategies. A score of less than most people in sensation seeking means that I have a high threshold and I need to use active strategies in order to get enough of the input that I need, but there might be something preventing me from meeting my threshold needs currently. So I might want to increase my opportunities for sensation seeking. For example, I engage in sensory seeking behavior when I listen to my favorite songs when I'm driving in the car. And then I scored more than most people on sensory sensitivity. Sensory sensitivity means low thresholds and a preference for passive strategies. So my score of more than most people means that I have a lower threshold than most people, and I benefit from increased environmental supports for doing activities and tasks. So with a higher score in sensory sensitivity, I benefit from using ear defenders or high fidelity earplugs when I'm in loud environments, such as when I'm flying. And I also benefit from wearing specific soft fabrics that feel best on my skin, like my super soft t-shirt. And then I scored more than most people on sensation avoiding. Sensation avoiding means low thresholds and a preference for active strategies. My score of more than most people means that I have a lower threshold than most people, and I have a greater preference for active strategies. So as a person with a higher score in sensation avoiding, I benefit from using a face masks in environments with strong non-preferred smells. So with COVID, I've actually really enjoyed getting to wear my mask everywhere. And I also benefit from increasing my input of favorite scents. For example, I keep a mini cinnamon broom in my car so that I smell one of my favorite smells while I'm driving. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I guess what I want to add to, first of all, thank you for sharing your scores and also some examples of your scores. And I know we're going to be getting, like, spoiler alert, I know we're getting into the individual systems, but if any of you are familiar with the sensory profile, or you've seen this work done before, or if you've heard of it, these are the 4 like overall generalized scores. And sometimes people may feel confused, but how can I be high, low, high, how can I have such high scores? Again, the sensory profile is not in the way that we look at low thresholds and high thresholds and active and passive strategies is not like you're not supposed to be just one. You're a mix. And what Ari's sensory profile is showing that Ari really has like a much more statistically significant increased need for all types of both sensory stimulation and the quality and intensity and tone of that sensory stimulation. And that is very typical. Thank you again, Ari, for showing or sharing with us your diagnoses. But for somebody who's neurodivergent, that is very typical. We have more than most people, more than most people, more than most people, or less than most people scores, because at a like neurological level, we are statistically significantly different than a neurotypical person. So it's not wrong to see those scores. It's more about validating that actually, yeah, Ari needs more neurologically.
All right, thanks, Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now we'll go through my sensory profile in more detail. and talk about what quadrant I'm in for the different sensory systems. All right, so for taste and smell, I scored low in low registration, and my taste and smell threshold is high, and my strategy preference is passive. And then for movement, which includes vestibular and proprioception, the quadrant that I scored in was sensory sensitivity, and my movement threshold is high, and my strategy preference is passive. And then for visual, I scored low in sensation seeking, and my visual threshold is high, strategy preference is active.
And I'll just to pause you right for a moment. If people are looking at these scores and they're like, okay, Ari, I hear you say low and low registration. Okay, what? Wait, what? Sometimes those words can be a little confusing, and what Ari and I have been talking about a lot over the past couple of months is that the sensory profile in taste and smell is showing that Ari actually has, at a neurological level, a high threshold and a preference for active strategies. And that low score is suggesting that maybe something has gotten in her way, maybe something has changed. And what we could do is increase the strategies that have more high threshold and a passive approach to meet Ari's need of low registration. Now, that can be confusing because sometimes people will see a low score and think that that means that you don't have that pattern preference in a sensory system. So they might see a low score and low registration and think, oh, Ari has a low threshold. No. Ari has a high threshold. And maybe we may need to do more to support Ari in meeting that high threshold need. Same with visual, low in sensation seeking. As in a professional in the field, I see this often with after COVID, because people have radically changed the way that they engage in visual information, the things that they see. And I know Ari, that's changed for you, and especially with the tint on your glasses. Really had to have some significant changes in how you are taking in visual information.
Anything else you want to add, Sarah, before I go on?
No.
All right, thank you. All right, and these are the three other systems. So for tactile, the quadrant is sensation avoiding, and my threshold is low. My strategy preference is active. For activity, I scored in sensory sensitivity. My threshold is low and my strategy preference is passive. And then for auditory, sensation avoiding, my threshold is low and my strategy preference is active.
When you look at those scores, Ari, across all 4 6, I mean, I always say, does that make sense to you? Yeah, because we do sensory. But does that make sense to you? When is this reflected in your life?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so for example, I'm thinking with auditory, with having a low threshold, I wear ear defenders when I'm in a loud environment. It's especially helped me with flying because I find airplanes to be really loud. So that's one that definitely makes sense for me.
And just to ask the question, how do you, as somebody who has a sensory or sensation avoiding pattern in your auditory system, sometimes OTs and other types of therapists suggest that you should then find ways to increase your tolerance of auditory sounds. How does that sit with you?
I'd rather listen to my favorite sounds more often and louder than listen to sounds that I don't like to hear and slowly get used to them. I think the only time in which I would use like exposure as something, as like a process for myself, is if like my lack of being comfortable with a certain sensory experience was preventing me from doing something that I wanted. So for example, I don't like the texture of chalk. Like thinking of chalk makes my skin kind of crawl, but I also love rock climbing. And so I had to get used to having chalk on my hands, because even if I wasn't putting chalk on my own hands, which eventually I did get used to doing, when you're touching the rock wall, other climbers have touched it and it's covered in chalk. So with that, I had to like increase my ability to be exposed to it. And I used like different types of chalk to find what was the best one for me. And I ended up finding there's like a liquid chalk that you put on kind of like lotion, and it doesn't feel quite as terrible as the powdered chalk.
Nice. Oh, that's a wonderful example of having a low threshold area that you found a way to make more enjoyable connections and found something that worked for you. Cool. Thank you.
All right, so we'll now dive into our first animal assisted services context, which is equine assisted therapy. So one activity that a therapist might do with a client in equine assisted therapy is grooming a horse. So the photo on this slide shows a black horse grazing in a green grass field, and the horse is covered in light tan mud and is swishing her tail. And this is definitely a horse that needs to be groomed. So let me tell you the steps that we follow when grooming a horse. So first step, use the curry comb in a circular pattern to loosen hair and dust. A curry comb is either a rubber or metal tool that has all these little nubs or points on it to help loosen dirt and hair when you rub it in a circle. And then 2, use hard and soft brushes in strokes following the direction of the horse's hair. So first you use the hard brush, which literally is like harder bristles on a brush, to brush off the larger pieces of dirt and the large pieces of hair that you loosened with the curry comb. And then you use a soft brush to brush off the smaller particles of dust and make the horse shiny. Then third thing you'll do is use a comb to brush the mane and tail. You might also use like a detangler spray or conditioner at this point on their hair. And then 4, use a hoof pick to remove dirt and rocks from the hooves. So a hoof pick is a curved metal tool and it has a handle on it, and you pick up each of the horse's hooves and use the hoof pick to clean out the space that is under the horse's hoof. And this is a step of grooming that in equine assisted therapy, there likely be a lot of support around this, because it can be pretty difficult to be bending over, holding the hoof and picking at the same time. So you might see that structured in a way that you, like the client would first just practice using the hoof pick while someone else holds the horse's legs. All right, so now we'll take a look at my sensory profile results and think about ways in which we can meet my sensory needs during horse grooming in equine assisted therapy. All right, so these are my scores displayed as a visual. So at the top, we have high threshold, and at the bottom, low threshold. Then on the left side, passive strategies, and on the right side, active strategies. So to give an example, my taste and smell, I have a high threshold and a preference for passive strategies. So one thing that I could do in horse grooming to best meet my sensory needs is to use a scented detangler spray on the horse when I'm combing their mane and tail. And then
what's your favorite?
My favorite scent I do have a favorite detangler spray for horses. It's called Santa Fe. And it's like this very kind of like not too sweet floral scent.
Okay.
All right. And then let's see. So for visual, high threshold and a preference for active strategies. So one thing that I could do when doing horse grooming, first I could have different colored brushes, but I could also have different colored ribbons or rubber bands or clips to put into the horse's mane that I can see while I'm grooming, and then also later when I'm riding the horse. And then I'll give one more example. For tactile, I have a low threshold and a preference for active strategies. So one thing that I always do when I'm grooming a horse is I wear gloves, because like I said, I'm sensitive to that feeling of like chalk or dust on my hands. And with horses, when you're grooming them, you're getting a lot of dust and dirt everywhere. And so I prefer to wear leather gloves while I'm grooming, just to keep my hands more clean.
Can I ask you a couple questions? And
Yes.
again, if anybody has any questions, please pop them into the chat or the Q&A. And so one thing I know, with your visual threshold, you got that low score in visual in sensory seeking. So you mentioned like using different color brushes or using like different color collars. Is that no? What was the
Different colored like ribbons or rubber bands.
ribbons and rubber bands and things like that? Um, I think that so in those spaces, I think it's really important with somebody who has a lower score just to take time to acknowledge that you're doing, like you're switching colors and think about, do I like it? Do I not like it? Just because with a low score, you are actually going to be looking to increase sensory seeking behaviors and things like that. The question I had though, like when I was listening to you, I just imagined dirt in my face and my eyes. And so what could somebody like maybe who has like you have sensory avoiding behaviors and tactile, and you already gave us some really good examples of like wearing gloves and things like that. I don't know if people could wear like goggles or glasses, but what are some other ways to really protect a lower threshold tactile when you have literal hair and dirt flying everywhere?
Yeah, so I always wear glasses because I need the prescription. So I have that protecting my eyes. But for someone who doesn't wear glasses for prescription, they could definitely wear goggles or like some sunglasses or non-prescription lenses to protect their eyes from dirt and hair. Another common thing to do is to tie a bandana around your face, just to like keep things from falling onto your face. So if you're grooming like a really, really dusty horse, that can be nice so that you're not inhaling all that dust. And then another strategy is to wear a long sleeved shirt. So that way the hair, like the little hairs that you're brushing off aren't getting stuck to your skin. Because I know, at least for me, like having those little hairs dig into my skin is pretty uncomfortable.
Mm. Yamina is asking what type of gloves you wear because they find that it limits their control of holding the brush.
Yeah, so I have gloves from a company called SSG, and I have like the like summer weight ones. So it's like a very, very light, stretchy material. It's almost like a extra light version of like a like swimsuit material maybe. But it's like a light version that's really stretchy. And then the palm of it has like a thin layer of suede. And I have found those to be my favorite for grooming and for riding, for that same reason, because I feel like gloves can really restrict you from like having enough precision.
Cool. I guess my last question would be movement. So you have a low reg, so again, a high threshold preference for passive strategies. So in my mind, as I'm imagining working with horses, there are a lot of movements that are possible around you and for you, like things that you have to do. For somebody who maybe has some form of dyspraxia or apraxia or difficult, any kind of impairment with movement itself, or maybe concerned about moving with something else, what are some typical strategies to help either support or protect that system?
You could decrease the amount of space on the horse that you're focused on grooming so that you're not having to move like from the neck all the way down to the tail every time you're brushing. So maybe start with all of the brushes in one area and then move on to the next area. So the space you're covering is a lot smaller. Sorry, my dog was making a noise. I think he's having a bad dream. And then for decreasing movement, or if you have maybe a movement disorder, the OT or the therapist who's working with the client can help by like supporting the elbow while the client is brushing, so that the client isn't having to do all of that themselves.
Nice, thank you.
Mhm.
I don't see any other questions in either the chat or the Q&A, so you can move forward, but that was excellent.
All right. All right, so another common activity in equine assisted therapy is riding the horse at the walk. This photo shows me riding a bay horse at the walk, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt and black riding tights. The horse is wearing a white saddle pad and a black saddle, and I'm wearing a black riding helmet. So these are the steps that you would follow when riding a horse at the walk. So 1, hold your reins with your hands oriented like you're holding ice cream cones. And then 2, look forward like you're looking between the horse's ears. 3, let your hips move with the horse's movement. And 4, breathe in a relaxed way. All right, so now we can take a look at my sensory profile results and think about the ways in which we can meet my sensory needs while I'm riding a horse at the walk in equine assisted therapy. So we talked about taste and smell, so having a high threshold for taste and smell and preference for passive strategies. So one thing that I could do is I could spray my riding helmet with a preferred scent. I could even like spray it with the Santa Fe horse spray, or I really like the smell of cinnamon broom, so I can put cinnamon there. And that's one way that I can reach towards my high threshold in smell when I'm riding. My other area for high threshold and passive strategies is movement. So one thing that we could do in equine assisted therapy would be to have me ride the horse in a bareback pad instead of a saddle, so that my body is moving more and not being as held in place when we're walking. Sarah, did you have anything you want to add or ask?
Okay. I think we asked this, or we talked about this yesterday. How many times a week? Like, you know, if you were, how many times a week does a horse need to be walked like this, or riding a horse at the walk?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that in equine assisted therapy, usually those programs have clients coming once a week to ride, but horses themselves need activity every single day. So either they'll be getting their activity from riding or from being turned out in pasture, or we have this kind of machine set up called an equisizer or a Eurosizer, and it's basically like a circle with little stalls that rotate. So the horse is just like walking in a circle to get exercise.
That's interesting to me. And so if the clients are not the ones, like if people are coming for, or actually, let me back it up. Would a client do this during equine assisted therapy?
A client would likely be on the horse at the walk in equine assisted therapy. They likely would not be turning the horses out to pasture or putting them on the equisizer as a part of therapy.
I'm thinking about, so with a client assisted therapy, like how big are the groups of people who come to work with the horses?
Yeah, it depends on the size of the program. But one important thing to consider is how many volunteers and professionals you have in the program who are able to work, because typically you'll have 4 people assisting, 3 all hands-on, and then 1 instructor or therapist to assist 1 person during equine assisted therapy. So that would be the horse leader, so the person who has a rope on the horse and is directing the horse to walk forward or stop or turn. And then you'll have 2 sidewalkers, so 1 on either side of the horse that is there to help with balance, position, things like that for the rider while they're riding. And then depending on the rider's balance, either those sidewalkers will literally just be walking alongside them, or they might have their forearm over the person's leg and their hand on the saddle to help hold the person in place.
Okay.
And then you'll have the fourth person would be the therapist who is directing the goals in the session.
Oh, you know what? I really like that. I did not realize that there were people who would actually like have almost sometimes hands-on just, and as somebody who sometimes I lose place of my body, like, where did it go? That actually is relieving to know that there's like some kind of external support or like almost like an external skeleton to capture, like to control this a little bit. My last question, I guess, for all of this, we talked about it yesterday, but a lot of times people, especially those of us on the spectrum, have low thresholds for vestibular input, which is movement, in that movement occurs and is registered largely inside of your inner ear. So the more you move your head, the more vestibular input. And if somebody has a low threshold, they may be very, dysregulated by the steps involved. I know you mentioned already one time, like maybe just focusing on one section of the horse as you were cleaning to limit your head movements. But I'm thinking about like getting off and on the horse and maybe ways or maybe even saddles that might help hold you differently if you did need a little bit more support to keep your head still.
Yeah, there is a huge variety of saddles and adaptive equipment that you can use, and a lot of DIY things that people do, people who run therapeutic riding centers. So for instance, I'm thinking, I used to volunteer at an equine assisted therapy facility, and we had one client who had very low tone in her whole body. So she was not able to hold herself up and hold her head up while on horseback. So what we did for her is we had what's called a surcingle, which is basically this leather strap that goes around the horse right in front of the rider, and it has handles on it. And then attached to those handles, we had kind of this like raised foam support so that the rider could have the front of her body against it with her chin resting on the top. And then she also had a back support and then the two side walkers to help keep her in place. And then as for the vestibular input and keeping your head still, that's where kind of the skills for being an equestrian, so like the proper way to ride a horse comes in. You want to have your eyes and your head facing forward. I talked earlier about like through the horse's ears. And so that's something that will remind riders as well, like to be looking through the horse's ears. Or if you're working on increasing vestibular input, you might have them turn to the side with their arms out, turn to the other side with their arms out to change the direction of their head while they're riding.
Wow. Well, I think I know we're moving on to a different animal, but thank you so much for this, because I want to just reinforce that this is especially like, well, I know it as hippotherapy, but like equine assisted therapy, like I know that so many people have such a profound experience when they work with horses. And I also know that sometimes people feel overwhelmed at the idea of working with horses. So this is really great to hear that there's so many different ways that you can adapt the activities so that everybody can, or as many people as we can, get engaged. The other thing that's really important is that there are some states that these types of therapies are now covered by most insurances, including Medicare and Medicaid. I know for sure Colorado, because that was the last state that did it. I think Oregon. I'm not sure. Do you know any other states that have like a real broad insurance coverage for this type of therapy?
Not off the top of my head. The facility I worked at was in Florissant, Missouri, and those services at the time were not covered by insurance.
Okay.
So it was either pay out of pocket, or we had a lot of fundraisers throughout the year to give scholarships to different riders.
Let me just check I don't see any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. Again, people who are here, feel free to ask them, but Ari, I think you can move along.
All right. All right, so now we'll jump into our second animal-assisted service context, which is service dogs. So one activity that you'll need to do daily, probably multiple times a day, if you have a service dog, is feed them. The picture in this slide shows 8 dog bowls arranged in 3 rows and filled with brown kibble. There's an orange bowl at the top, 4 white bowls decorated with green and black paint, and then 3 silver metal bowls at the bottom. So these are the steps that I follow when I'm preparing food to feed my service dogs. So first, measure the dog food into the dog's bowl using a 1-cup scoop. Second, add any vitamins, supplements, or medications to the bowl. 3, add toppings, so things like freeze-dried chicken or salmon skin or cottage cheese. And then 4, add water to the bowl. And 5, mix everything together with a spoon. So now we'll take a look at my sensory profile results and then think about ways in which we can meet my sensory needs while I'm doing the task of feeding my service dog. So I have high threshold for taste and smell and a preference for passive strategies. So this one is interesting because I'm a vegetarian, and I think this might ring true for a lot of people. Dog food doesn't smell that great to humans. So I'm not a huge fan of the smell of dog food, but I still do have the high threshold for smell and a preference for passive strategies. So that's something changing in my environment. So one thing that I could do to facilitate this task for myself is light a candle next to where I'm serving the dogs their food, or I can have like a room spray or something like that, so that I'm still getting the sensory input of smell, but it's a smell that I like better than dog food. And then let's see, for movement, that's also high threshold and passive strategies. So one thing that I do to meet this need is the way that I have the dog food stored and the bowl set up. So I have the dog food is low to the ground in a container, and the dog bowls are pretty high up, like on a little shelf on top of a high counter. So I'm doing a lot of like bending down and then coming back up to put the food in the bowls. Sarah, did you have any questions or comments you want to add for this one?
I think for this one, I'm noticing your activity score. And so you have a low threshold. So this is typically the sensory sensitivity quadrant. But what that means is that you have a low threshold and a preference for passive strategies, things set up for the environment, set up around you for success. And I think that actually like naturally lends to the task of feeding dogs, because you really like passive strategies, like you have to feed them, you know, at certain times, you have to feed them certain things. And so you actually do have a real strong preference for the way that you move and the way that you engage in things being like part of a system. And that again is just really naturally meeting your sensory needs. If somebody had a higher score or a different score for their activity, you might have to be creative with the ways that you're supporting them in, you know, like, because it's obviously important to feed your puppers and do all those things. So I was just thinking that like how it's always interesting to me how people seem to naturally gravitate toward animals and experiences that actually really already support. Let's go to so tactile though. What are some strategies that you have, because you do have a low threshold and a preference for active strategies to protect that threshold? So what are some of the things that you do during feeding?
So probably the main thing that I do is I use a large spoon to mix the dog food and the toppings and supplements together instead of like using my finger or my hand. So I'm not touching the actual food and the moisture of the water. And I'm instead using like a long spoon so my hand's not close to it.
Yeah, Nina, I was just actually looking at the question and answers, and Nina, you're coming in. First of all, hi from England. Yay. There's so many people across the pond that are so lovely, and I love them. Hi. My partner is from Manchester, England, and so, but I've never been. I can't wait to get there someday. Oh, you are, Nina? Cool. Awesome. And so Nina, you asked and said like I'm not quite sure you understand if you have a high threshold and an active strategy preference, what might you do? All right. So with the task of feeding a dog or doing something or anything that you want to do, if you have a low threshold and a preference for active strategies, people who have that sensory seeking really like to have new experiences, create new things. I think that within this context of having it might actually come down to the type of dog you have. Like I'm imagining a sensory seeker, someone who has that high threshold and likes a lot of new things, might do better with like a really excited dog or something that has a bigger personality or maybe has more energy needs to meet, so that everything that you're doing, like when you have a dogs, I don't, Ari, you can correct me or not, but like I find my puppy girl is the best external thermometer for me ever. And so because I am more passive and like things set up in there, like that's how she kind of sinks into the environment in the background. But a sensory seeker would probably go more with that high energy need, big creativity, noise, maybe a little louder, a little chattier. But that is an example. So passive strategies and things that we do in the environment are more about support and structure. And active strategies are more about like new creation, engagement, exciting experience, like, just big experiences. So I think that just one way that you could address that, if you had more of a sensory seeking personality, you would find a dog that likes sensory seeking as well and likes to be constantly engaged. And if you're more of a like lay back and just kind of like go with the flow personality, that's more of a passive strategy. So like finding a dog that has more passive needs that just really likes to be a part of like the team. Um, Does that answer your question, or can I expand that a little bit more? You're welcome. Yay. Okay, perfect. Nina, I'm with the recording. I will send, there's a whole lecture that I have that explains the thresholds and strategies in detail. I'll send that link. It's about an hour, but it will explain these like thoroughly. You're welcome. Well,
All right, ready to move on to the next one?
yeah.
All right. Okay, so going to the grocery store for a training outing is an activity that you'll likely do if you have a service dog. The picture on this slide shows me looking down at two white service dogs who are both standard poodles. I'm smiling and pointing at my nose, and the two dogs are looking up at me. Both of them are wearing colorful bandanas. One of them is wearing a green harness and the other one is wearing a black harness. And then in the background, there are some yellow and red buckets and bags on shelves. All right, so for the steps involved in going on a training outing to the grocery store, first, you'll need to make sure that you have all the equipment that you need. So this could be like your collar, leash, service dog vest, treat bag with treats, boots, if needed, things like that. Two, you'll need to think about your training goals, including what tasks you want to work on and practice. Three, have scripts ready or info cards ready to respond to questions or access issues that you might run into. And four, practice your public access skills and tasks in the store. Sarah, do you have any questions or comments on that before we move on to my sensory profile?
My comment is only like the same one that I had before. I am genuinely like impressed with how, much really goes into considering training. That's beautiful. I think that's great. And goes back to, like, we didn't actually say it in the beginning, but, and everybody here, we support, Ari and I are big supporters of animal assisted therapies and services. And this, to me, shows the tremendous amount of respect that goes into the relationship between you and the dog that you're training or you're with, and really the amount of consideration for what you're doing and appreciation for them. So cool. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so now to take a look at my sensory profile results and think about ways in which we can meet my sensory needs when I go on a training outing with my service dog to the grocery store. So for an example, for tactile, I have active strategies preference and a low threshold. So this means that I need just a smaller amount of tactile input to meet my needs. One thing that I could do in a service dog context is I can train the dog to give me tactile stimulation that is in a form that I enjoy. So that could be training your dog to like lick your hand or gently mouth your hand, paw at you, or just lean their weight against you. And those are ways that your dog can give tactile input when you're out in public or when you're at home. Then looking at visual, high threshold, and a preference for active strategies. Similar to what I said with grooming the horse, you can decorate your service dog's vest, or with poodles, I can decorate their hair pretty easily to increase the amount of visual stimulation I'm getting to meet the high threshold need that I have. Sarah, do you have anything to add before we go on?
I think that, so for somebody, I have actually, like, we have different sensory profiles, and I have my puppy girl. And actually, I don't know if I ever told you that Lady Caitlin was my first dog. And just changed my life on how I understand relationships with dogs. I'm wondering, the thing that, so as I have reformed this relationship with Kate, again, I said, like, she's my external thermometer. I don't like it when she's upset because I'm upset. Like, that's my very first thing. I'm like, oh shoot. Like, I never want Katie Pie to be upset. And so I find that in addition to, like, when I'm thinking about, like, if we were ever to go out, because I do go out with her, not in a training sense, but I actually have to do a lot of work before and after, because I have to make sure to resource myself as much as I can, so that she doesn't have to. And that, again, that's a different relationship because she's not working and things like that. But I find, like, especially like at tactile levels, I usually get like thick jojoba oil or something, shea butter, that's a little thicker and will really like rub it into my skin, which again helps me to kind of stay focused and centered in my body. And when I'm in my body, I can better interact with another person, individual being, my puppy girl. And I think that might be important to mention that when, like, if you're considering getting a service animal, or what are your needs too? Like, I think it's kind of beautiful. Like, one of the things that I've learned is just like it almost forces you to kind of consider your needs and what might help you. Where, I feel like we live in a society that almost like thrives when people aren't paying attention to how they feel and stuff. And so it's I think I'm just sitting with the enormity of opportunities. Yeah. You said you've been doing this for 20 years, 10 years, 20 years writing, 10 years training.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you feel like? Because you also shared you're autistic and ADHD, I think. Growing up, how what really supported you in being able to engage in something like this? Is a lot of executive functioning. So what has helped you in this?
So one thing that I was thinking of when you mentioned, like, if you're thinking about getting a service dog, you need to think about what your needs are and kind of like what the things you can tolerate are. And one thing that people might not think about when they're considering getting a service dog is just how much people will be looking at you and asking you questions when you're out with your dog. It happens literally every time you go out. Like, you can't just go to the grocery store and like walk in, grab your milk and leave. It's always, you have to account for like some extra time and just that extra energy dealing with people looking at you or asking questions. I frequently have people trying to take pictures of me, which I really don't like. So I have like a script that I say, like, please don't take pictures of me. You wouldn't take a picture of someone's wheelchair, is what I'll say, like, if I run into that in public. And then in terms of the executive function for getting out the door with my dogs, I have a bin next to the door where I keep my keys. And that bin has everything that I need in it to take with me. So it has my treat bag with treats in it. It has the harnesses for the dogs for riding in the car. It has their service dog vests, leash and collars. It also has boots and the dog raincoats for different weather if I need it. And so I have all of those things set out for me. When I was newer to having a service dog, I also had a list of things, like I had a list of the things I needed written down so I could check that list the night before, like going to class, to make sure that I had everything that I needed.
Nina was saying that sounds really frustrating. I think regarding like people coming and talking to you and having that extra requirement of interaction.
Yeah, it can be difficult.
And Nina, thanks for letting me know. Everybody, I just enabled the chat. Sorry. I didn't want you to talk in the chat, but now everybody should be able to. Go on, Ari, I'm sorry.
All right. Did that answer your question?
Me? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
I think again, it impresses upon me how much you've been doing. You know what I mean? Like how much you really do work in this. And I'm not like, just impressive. Go you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So now I'll go through some of the questions that people asked leading up to this presentation. So questions that were left on comments on the videos or Facebook page. All right, so for the first questions, these are questions about getting a service dog. So what are the routes to getting a service dog? How does one get started in the service dog process? And how do you find financial aid to use towards a service dog? So again, a service dog is a dog who has been trained specifically to do tasks and work that help their disabled handler. Under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, service dogs are legally allowed to be owner trained. So like a dog that you train yourself, or program trained. So a dog like from Guiding Eyes for the Blind or Canine Companions for Independence. Those are program trained dogs. And so the ADA legally allows both of those, and they have the same rights. In order to get started in the service dog process, it's first a good idea to contact a program, or if you're going to be owner training your dog, a private trainer, to kind of get more information about what it looks like to get a service dog, and really go through the pros and cons. So making a pros and cons list with the trainer or the program is really helpful, because like I said, there are some cons to having a service dog, such as like the public always looking at you and wanting to talk to you, or people trying to pet your dog. So you have to really consider, like, do the pros outweigh the cons for me? And for me, it does. In terms of funding a service dog, a lot of people will do a self-run fundraiser or a program-run fundraiser to earn money towards their dogs. Service dogs can be really expensive, like thousands and thousands of dollars after they've been trained, especially the program dogs can cost like $20,000 or more. And so for a lot of people, that's not a reachable price right out of pocket. So they'll do a fundraiser, or some programs even offer scholarships that you can use towards getting your dog. And then also for tax returns, if you are itemizing your deductions, you can put your service dog expenses, so like expenses towards food and vet and things like that, you can put that on your tax returns as a medical expense, because under the ADA, a service dog is considered medical equipment. Any questions on those, Sarah, before we move to the next one?
I didn't know that. So that's good to know. No questions. Good information. Thank you.
All right. So this question, what are strategies or scripts for when a service dog handler team is denied access to public places? So if you've never been out with a service dog, you might not know this, but a lot of people who are in like a manager position, working in stores or restaurants, strangely are not familiar with service dog laws, and will sometimes say things like, we don't allow dogs in here. And as a person who's autistic and who has anxiety, like this used to really stress me out. And I'd sometimes feel like I couldn't say anything in this situation, and then I would just need to leave. So what I did to help myself with that is I came up with some scripts that I could say even when I'm feeling stressed out. And I also carry ADA info cards with the number for the ADA hotline on them to give to people if I don't feel like I have the energy or space to verbally tell people all this information. But I wrote down some of the scripts that I use, so I'll read those to you. My service dog is trained to help me with my disabilities, and they're allowed to go with me anywhere where the general public is allowed. 2 is, it is illegal to deny access to a service dog. 3, not all disabilities are visible. Please respect my privacy. And like I said, having the ADA cards. I have found over my like 10 or 11 years of having a service dog that the script that people seem to really react to and respect is not all disabilities are visible. Please respect my privacy. Because I don't have a disability that's visible from the outside, people will like question me, like, why do you need a service dog? Or like ask me intrusive questions like, what's wrong with you? And so I find that if I say like, not all disabilities are visible, please respect my privacy, people are kind of like, oh yeah, that is pretty rude to ask somebody.
Yeah. I think too, from the sensory processing side of it, one of the beauties of using scripts is like it takes away from the processing part, so sensory processing. And so when you have a script or becomes palalia or echolalia, which are valid forms of communication. Palalia is when you repeat something that you yourself have made up, or an echolalia is repeating something that somebody else has made up or has said. So like movie scripts, things like that. But I have scripts specifically for me as a deaf person, similar to these kind of things. And I find that saying those scripts and practicing the scripts over and over again really does help me in situations. So I don't even have to think about what to say or what I'm going to do. Having that plan in place so it's a passive strategy to remove the processing requirement of, oh gosh, now I have to interact with this person, or it's very scripting. It's very helpful. And actually, I really don't know why people get emotional. I don't know what the word is. They get funny around scripting and echolalia. And I'm pulling it out. Like, keep it with me. It's all messed up now. But I have my script from when I first moved into my house. And this is a script that helped me with the house scared the heck out of me because it had like a steam heating So it was like pop, 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 pop. I'm like, what the heck is happening in my house? So I developed a script for myself. And again, that like when I'm having the sensory input, so my brain is going to respond to that no matter what. And having that sensory, having that as part of my processing just removes the impact of the sensory information. So I imagine having these kind of scripts ready for people who are interacting really does help with, just so that you don't have all your interaction spoons taken. Cool. Have you ever had a situation where you felt like you just had to leave?
Yes.
Bummer. I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah. Thankfully not too often. And I will say, while you were talking about like having support so that you don't have to do the processing yourself, one support that I sometimes have is having my sister or mom or a friend with me. And oftentimes if there's like an access issue while I'm out with them, if I'm not like jumping right in to say something, like they know the scripts that I use and they'll just say it for me. So that's really helpful as well.
Mhm.
I've definitely had like some rude things said to me, or like people insisting that I'm blind, things like that, like insisting that they know what my disabilities are because I have a dog. Or like a really common one is just people asking like, well, what's wrong with you? Which is not cool.
You're like, people ask me questions like this. That's what's wrong. No, I'm kidding. I mean, it's like I get that people are curious, but you're right that there's it's helpful to just think about how like what information we actually have a right to and really what information we don't, and being comfortable with that and not thinking, I don't know. I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah. Like I said, the not all disabilities are visible has
Yeah.
helped so much that I got a patch that says that, and I have it on my service dog vest now.
Awesome. Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
So that's been helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And then how do you make sure to respect the animal's well-being and boundaries through service work? So as Sarah was saying before, like both Sarah and I are very supportive of animal assisted services and service dogs and service animals. But it is really important because these are also living creatures to respect their boundaries and make sure that they're well enough in order to support you. So here are some ideas that I have of ways that you can make sure to respect the animal's well-being if you have a working animal. So first, establish a relationship with a vet and schedule regular checkups. That is absolutely crucial for any animal you have, whether it's a working animal or not. Work with a professional trainer or educate yourself about canine psychology and health. Dogs perceive the world differently from how we perceive the world. And so it's important to educate yourself on that so that you can understand where they're coming from when you're communicating. Recognize that your service dog is a living sentient being. And if you're unsure about your dog's well-being, take a break and discuss with the vet. So there are days in which, like for today, my service dog in training, Francis, is pretty stressed about something. I'm not sure what, but he's whining in the background. And I'm not sure what's stressing him out. But on a day like this, when I hear he's whining and seeming stressed, like I wouldn't take him with me to go run errands because I wouldn't want to push him over his threshold of what he can deal with.
That's so lovely. I have nothing. I am someone, again, like this is totally new to me, this area, and I am just constantly impressed with the level of respect throughout.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. So before we open up to some questions, if people have live questions, I want to just review some of the key things that we've learned this week through this live presentation, also through the videos that I shared with you. So first, what are animal assisted services? So animal assisted services include animal assisted activities, animal assisted therapy, and service animals. Animal assisted activities are activities in which an animal is present for interaction, motivation, comfort, and learning. And in animal-assisted activities, there are not specific client-centered goals that are being addressed by a therapist. Whereas in animal-assisted therapy, an animal such as a horse or dog is used in a goal-oriented session that is led by a therapist, such as an OT or a speech therapist. And then service dogs and service horses, so miniature horses, those are service animals. They're trained to work and perform tasks to mitigate the disabilities of their disabled handler. How are animal-assisted services and sensory related? They are related in that a client has sensory needs and preferences, and you can integrate these needs and preferences into the animal-assisted services to better serve the client and make them more comfortable. And then how can I access services? You can speak with your healthcare provider about what kind of animal-assisted services you're interested in for yourself or for a loved one. You can also go to your state's government website, and there should be a section that talks about service dogs or service animals, animal-assisted services, and what services are covered in your state. And then another great way to learn more about animal-assisted services and make connections in your community are to connect online. So for instance, Instagram has a really big service dog community that produces a ton of posts, useful posts about like training and just general information and resources. So tapping into those online environments can be a really good way to gain more information about your local area. And now, if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat and Sarah and I will look into them.
Yeah, you can ask them, or if you want to be unmuted, we can unmute you. That's fine too. Anything. While people are thinking of their questions, like we have about 20 minutes. So number one, good job with time. And I think it's really interesting as somebody who uses the sensory profile, like how could we possibly like maybe identify animals that might be a better fit for somebody based on their sensory profile? What do you think about that?
Yeah, that is definitely relevant, especially if you're like considering getting a service dog. Under the ADA, any breed of dog can be a service dog. It doesn't have to be like a lab or retriever or German Shepherd like we often see in the media. And one thing to really take into account before you choose what breed you're going to work with is how does that breed fit in with your day-to-day life and how you like to get your activity. So for example, like a Australian Shepherd or German Shepherd, those are really high drive, high energy dogs, and they need a lot of stimulation and a lot of exercise to meet their own sensory threshold needs. Like dogs and horses, everyone has these needs as well. And you need to pay attention to like, if your dog has really high need for exercise and activity, and yet you prefer to be inside, like doing quiet activities and not exercising as much, then a high energy dog like a German Shepherd is not going to be a good fit for you as a service dog. I have standard poodles, which is the breed that I've had since I was a little kid, and I just love them. I find that they suit me really well for service work because they're high energy and they're motivated to perform, but they can also just be, they kind of match your energy, match you where you are. So if I want to just be like in my pajamas watching Netflix all day, my dogs will just like curl up on the couch with me. Or if I want to go out on a couple mile hike, like they're ready for that too. So that's a way, I guess, in which my breed choice really matches my own needs.
I'm even thinking about like, so you mean I like the idea too. And I'm thinking about like someone who has lower thresholds and maybe, preference for active strategies. So it's quote unquote sensory avoiders. Sensory avoiders are really sensory connoisseurs. Like they know what they like and that's it. And they're really protective of that, which I think is awesome and called self-advocacy. Way to advocate for yourself. But I'm almost wondering if like a little hedgehog or like a bearded lizard or something, or if somebody is sensory sensitive, like a turtle. No, I want a turtle. But something that has a little bit like, again, So a lower threshold and the more passive strategy needs. So setting up their beautiful little living environment, making it cute, you have your little feeding times, that kind of stuff, but it's all like really kind of contained into this cultural way that you interact in your environment and they're a part of your environment versus more active strategies, which would be more of those like dogs and things that like really thrive on connection and creation. And then even thinking of it, like you said, like a lab versus a shepherd.
Mhm.
My Katie Pie is a lab. And so that's a great mix for me. She's like, oh, here's like her little tail's going. So, but even like, yeah, like the different types of, okay, so Ella has a question. First, so thank you. You're welcome, Ella. I was just wondering if you know of many care or social farms with occupational therapists carrying out animal assisted therapy. I I personally do. I have a lot of friends who do it. And that's so I live in New England. So in the Connecticut, and especially when you get up into like New Hampshire and Vermont, and Massachusetts, there's definitely a lot of opportunities. How about you, West Coast?
Yeah, definitely yes. There are a lot of facilities like that here in Northern California. I also used to live in St. Louis, Missouri. And like I said, I volunteered at a therapeutic farm there. And there are a lot of new programs opening right now. Even like there's a big kind of interest and push in the equestrian world itself into considering adding equine assisted services to the programs that people already have at their barns.
And so, Ari, are people hiring? So, for me in New England, what I've noticed is that my friends who are participating sometimes are participating in their role as an occupational therapist, like an OT. They're bringing OT services in, and a lot of times too, they're actually just they're filling an established role, but bringing their expertise into that role. So it might not necessarily be listed as occupational therapy, but an occupational therapist can be the person filling that role.
Right.
Is that similar to what you see?
Yes.
Okay. Ella, the more, I don't know where you are, Ella, like obviously our context is the United States. And I think that just the more insurance coverage. Oh, you live in the UK too. Oh, the UK is on fire. Y'all are doing it right. You're doing a lot of things right over there. So first of all, I'm super oh, your
Yeah.
masters. So you work one day on a care farm as a facilitator. Yeah, I would be interested to know with the UK and the National Health, NIH, I think. Do you have that covered under insurance, my UK friends? NHS, thank you.
Ella, one thing that
Oh, sorry. It's our equine and assisted therapies covered under by the NHS. The only thing that I know, Nina and Ella, is that like I'm in the farm I work with is funded by council funding that you have to apply for. Yeah. The specific programmatic funding that I'm aware of is like for send. Like once you get like, oh my gosh, I know that there's just money and that once that like the parent can create a program of care and equine assisted therapies can be a part of that for their send funding. Okay, so adult recovery. I'm gonna find out. Do you know, Ari, about UK and
I don't know off the top of my head, but I was going to suggest looking up the website for One Equine Trust, which is located in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And they're kind of, it's a newer program that's trying to put Northern Ireland and the UK on the map for equine assisted therapy research and program development. So they might have some resources that they could suggest to you.
can you, what was that? Can you write that in the chat, please?
Yes.
I love that you said Ireland. Ireland has been coming to me a lot recently. One equine, yeah, thank you. Galway was the program that I work with, or the area that I work with last.
I love Galway.
I've never been. Well, I have virtually. It was great virtually. We have a couple more minutes. Any other questions? All right, you did so good. So freaking proud of you.
Thank you, Sarah.
You're welcome.
For your help.
Don't leave me. Ella, you're so welcome. Ella says thank you. Nina says thank you. All right. Well, then I think we'll just start kind of closing up. I think number one, I will definitely send out that lecture that I have recorded that explains sensory processing in a little bit of more detail. And I think the two of like this lecture and that one together will be helpful. But I have enjoyed personally learning so much about this topic, and especially like how sensory comes into it. And the reality is, for me, I just like everything is sensory. Like that's what I keep coming back to, is that and I loved how you said like dogs and horses and all animals, they have their own sensory thresholds too. And as somebody who's worked in the field for a bonkers amount of years, I have always found that when you can respect and understand somebody else's or something else's sensory needs, it makes it's like a bridge to accepting that you yourself have sensory needs and sensory preferences. And so cool. Any final words, Ari?
I would just say on that, that's one of the reasons why I love horses so much, because they're very honest and open about what they're feeling and what their thresholds and needs are. And so I find that when I'm working with horses, that I have a better understanding of how I'm feeling in that moment as well, because we kind of, when you're with a horse, you're really reading off of each other and kind of having a conversation that's more through, not through spoken language, but through like what you're doing when you're interacting with each other.
And it's not two humans. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like, it's like humans, I never, like, sometimes, it's not that I never trust humans, that sounds weird, but like, I never, like, sometimes humans don't even know what they need. And so it's almost relieving to think of like an authentic, honest being just honestly communicating with me.
I love this comment from Nina.
Yeah, my cats. Go ahead, you want to read it?
Yeah, my cat smells so good. I don't know how. I think I'm very sensory seeking. My cat very much tells me when he wants attention and hides in his box when he doesn't want it. Good night, all. Strongly agree. My dog smells so good. Like sometimes I'll just be sitting on the couch and like smelling his head because he just smells like comfort to me.
And you have a high threshold need for smell. And so that's beautiful. And so, yes, Nina, you're probably right. You have a very high threshold need for that scent, and it's neurologically important to you to have your kitty cat scent. So keep sniffing away. Cool. All right. Well, then, yeah, I think we'll just wrap it up now and say thank you to everybody. for coming. The video so you'll be getting a link to a Google Drive. You are welcome to share that. You are welcome to use it in classes or to use it like however you need to use this to support yourself, please do. Ari and I are both committed to education being accessible. So there's no necessarily like copyright restrictions on this. Just give Ari and I our little authorship, I guess. But please use this in any way that you need. You will be getting a link to a folder that will have this, actually a huge PowerPoint. This is the end of a PowerPoint. But we'll have a PowerPoint available to you and the recording and also the previous recording on sensory processing. So that should come out in a couple days. Yeah, now I just have to figure out how to say bye to Ari. So we'll practice now. Bye,
Thank you so
everybody.
much.
Yeah, bye. Bye. Thank you so much for coming. Bye. Yay. Yay. And they're gone.
We did it.
You did it. Let me stop